Welcome back to the English Speak Up Academy podcast.
Oh.
I'm Alex, and with me today is Emma.
Hi, everyone.
We're here to help you conquer a challenge
Yeah.
so many English learners face, overthinking while
Yeah.
speaking. We've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
You're about to speak,
Huh?
and suddenly your mind is flooded with worries.
Oh, absolutely.
Will I make a mistake?
Ah,
Not
that's
foolish.
definitely a common.
It's definitely not
definitely not
alone.
alone in this.
Overthinking is a common experience. But understanding the psychology behind it can empower us to overcome these hurdles.
Today, we'll explore the root causes of overthinking.
Okay.
We'll identify those mental blocks that trip us up
Right.
and arm you with practical strategies to speak with more confidence. First,
And okay.
let's tackle the big question. Why do we overthink when speaking English?
Well, overthinking in this context is rooted in fear. Our brain is trying to protect us from potential negative outcomes, making mistakes, appearing foolish.
Feeling embarrassed.
So it's like our inner critic is trying to keep us safe,
Yeah.
but it ends up holding us back.
Precisely. This response comes from our primal fight-or-flight instinct.
Okay.
Our brain perceives speaking English as a threat and reacts accordingly. Instead of allowing us to speak naturally,
Right.
it bombards us with negative thoughts.
Thoughts like, what if I sound stupid?
Yes.
Or what if they laugh at me?
Those are common examples. And that's when we freeze up. It's similar to stage fright,
Right.
but in everyday conversations.
Now that we understand why this happens, let's explore some of those mental barriers that keep us stuck.
Sure.
The first one that comes to mind is the fear of judgment.
Many language learners are doubly concerned about others' perceptions of their English. It can feel as if all eyes are on us,
Right.
waiting for us to slip up.
Can you give us an example of how this might play out in a real conversation?
Imagine someone asks for your opinion. Instead of expressing yourself, your inner voice takes over. You might think, what if my grammar is wrong?
Yeah.
Maybe I should just stay quiet. As a result, you say nothing.
It's as if the fear paralyzes us. How can we move past this fear of judgment?
It's crucial to remember that people generally don't fixate on our mistakes as much as we do.
Okay.
They're usually more focused on understanding our message.
Right.
And even if they do notice a mistake, it's rarely a big deal.
So we need to shift our focus from absolute accuracy to effective communication.
Right. Another helpful tip is to try speaking as if you are confident. Even if you don't feel it at first, it can help trick your brain into feeling more at ease.
That's a really interesting idea. Are there other things we can do to combat this fear?
There are certain phrases you can incorporate into your conversations. Things like, I'm still learning, but here's what I think, or let me try explaining this, or I may not say this perfectly, but these phrases acknowledge that you are still learning while demonstrating your willingness to communicate.
Those phrases create a safe space for us to express ourselves without the fear of being judged.
They do, and they help to manage expectations.
Okay.
Let's move on to another common culprit, perfectionism.
Perfectionism is a big one for me.
Yeah.
It's that idea that if our English isn't flawless,
Right.
it's not good enough.
Perfectionism sets an incredibly high and often unattainable standard. This leads to immense pressure and frustration. The truth is, perfect English doesn't exist.
Right.
Even native speakers make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
It's more about getting your message across effectively.
So we need to be more forgiving of ourselves
Yes.
and embrace the imperfection that is inherent in language learning.
Absolutely. Think about this scenario. Someone asks you about your weekend plans.
Okay.
Instead of answering directly,
Yeah.
your mind gets caught up in grammatical details. You might think, should I say I went or I have gone? What's the grammatically correct way to express this? And because you are so focused on getting it perfectly right,
Yeah.
you end up giving a vague or incomplete response.
That's a perfect example of how perfectionism can sabotage our fluency.
Yeah.
We get so caught up in the details
Right.
that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Communication.
To overcome this mental block,
Okay.
we need to shift our focus from speaking perfectly to simply being understood. We need to give ourselves permission to make mistakes and view them as valuable learning opportunities.
It sounds like we need to reframe our thinking.
Yeah.
Are there any phrases that can help us do that?
Certainly.
Okay.
Try using phrases like, even if I make mistakes, I can still communicate. Or fluency is about confidence, not perfection. These simple statements can help us embrace the imperfection of language learning.
I love that.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off.
It does.
Now, let's talk about another obstacle. Negative self-talk. I think this is something we all struggle with from time to time.
Negative self-talk can be incredibly detrimental to our progress. If we constantly tell ourselves that our English is bad, our brain will eventually believe it.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We convince ourselves we are not good enough.
Exactly.
And that prevents us from improving.
This is where positive self-talk comes in. Instead of focusing on our shortcomings, we need to replace those negative thoughts with positive ones. Before speaking, try saying to yourself, I can do this, or I'm making progress every day.
And during conversations, remind yourself, I have something valuable to say, and I can communicate even if it's not perfect.
These affirmations can boost our confidence and help us break free from that cycle of self-doubt. It's about changing our inner dialogue to support our language learning journey. Now that we have uncovered some of those psychological barriers, let's discuss some practical strategies to help us break free from overthinking and start speaking with more confidence.
This is what I'm really excited to learn about. I know we've talked about the mental blocks, but what can we actually do to overcome them?
One of the most effective techniques is training ourselves to think directly in English rather than translating from our native language.
I've heard about this, but it sounds really challenging. How can we actually start thinking in English?
It may feel awkward at first, but with consistent practice, it becomes more natural. There are a few methods you can try. One is to narrate your day in English, either out loud or in your head.
So as we go about our daily routines, we can describe what we're doing, seeing, and even thinking.
Yes, that's a great way to start. Another helpful tip is to change your phone and social media settings to English. This will immerse you in the language even when you are not actively studying.
That's a really simple change that can make a big difference. I'm going to do that today. What about for people who enjoy reading?
If you enjoy reading, try picking up an English book or magazine. Make a conscious effort to think about the content in English as you read. Don't worry about understanding every single word. Just focus on grasping the general meaning.
These are some really practical tips. It sounds like the key is to really surround ourselves with the English language as much as possible.
That's a great way to put it. The more exposure you have, the more comfortable you'll become with thinking in English.
What are some other strategies that can help us stop overthinking during conversations?
One helpful strategy is to utilize filler phrases. These phrases can give us time to process our thoughts when we feel that pressure to respond immediately in a conversation.
I've definitely experienced those moments where my mind goes blank and I can't think of what to say. How can filler phrases help?
They provide a valuable buffer, giving our brains a moment to catch up and formulate a response without those awkward silences. They also sound natural and keep the conversation flowing smoothly.
Can you give us some examples of filler phrases we can use?
Of course. Some common ones are, that's a great question, let me think for a second, or how should I say this?
Okay.
These are simple phrases, but they can make a big difference in reducing the pressure we feel to respond instantly.
I like that these phrases not only buy us some time, but also acknowledge the listener and show that we are engaged in the conversation.
And perhaps the most important strategy of all is to speak English every single day, even if you are alone. Consistency is key when it comes to language learning.
Right.
The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you will become.
I know we have a lot of listeners who might be thinking, but I don't have anyone to practice with. What would you tell them?
There are countless ways to incorporate daily speaking practice into your routine, even if you are alone. You can describe your morning routine out loud as you get ready for the day. You can read a short article and then summarize it or explain it to yourself in English. And if you find yourself alone at home, don't hesitate to talk to yourself while cooking, cleaning, or even just walking around.
It might feel strange at first, but remember that you are your own best language partner.
That's a great point. Don't be afraid to talk to yourself in English. It's a great way to practice and build your confidence. Let's shift our focus to real-life conversation scenarios.
I think this will be really helpful for our listeners. We all encounter situations where overthinking tends to creep in. What are some common scenarios we can prepare for?
One common scenario is when someone asks a question and you're not sure how to respond.
This happens to me all the time. I feel that pressure to answer immediately,
Yeah.
and my mind goes blank.
Instead of panicking and retreating into silence, remember those filler phrases we discussed earlier. They are your secret weapon to buy some time and gather your thoughts.
So we can use phrases like, "That's a great question. Let me think for a moment,"
Right.
to avoid that awkward silence.
Precisely. It gives you a brief pause to consider your response and ensures you don't feel pressured to answer immediately. Another scenario where overthinking often arises is when we're trying to express an opinion or make a suggestion.
I find this one really challenging. I worry about saying something wrong or using the incorrect words.
In these situations, it can be helpful to preface your statement with phrases that acknowledge your learning process.
So we could say something like, "I'm still learning English, but I think,"
Uh-huh.
or "This might not be the best way to say it, but..."
Those are great examples. These phrases create a safe space for you to express yourself without the fear of judgment. And if you are ever unsure about a particular word or grammar rule, don't be afraid to ask for clarification.
That's a good reminder. Sometimes we forget that it's okay to ask for help.
Simply say something like, "Excuse me, can you explain what word means?" Or, "I'm not sure I understand the grammar here. Could you help me?" Native speakers are generally happy to help and they'll appreciate your effort to learn.
It's reassuring to know that we have that support available. We don't have to figure everything out on our own.
Remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps along the way, but embrace those challenges and keep moving forward.
How could we encourage ourselves to step outside our comfort zones and actually put these strategies into practice?
One powerful technique is to set small, achievable goals. Instead of aiming for perfection right away, focus on making small improvements each day.
So instead of trying to speak perfectly, we can focus on using one new filler phrase in a conversation, or speaking for 1 minute without translating in our head.
That's a great example. As you achieve these small wins, you'll build momentum and gain the confidence to tackle bigger challenges. Finding a supportive language learning community can also be helpful.
I agree. Surrounding yourself with people who understand your struggles and encourage your progress can make a world of difference. Where can we find these communities?
There are online forums, language exchange groups, or even just a friend who's also learning English. These can provide valuable support and motivation.
It's amazing how much we can learn from and support each other, and it's important to celebrate our successes along the way.
Every time you step outside your comfort zone and use your English skills, acknowledge your effort and give yourself credit for the progress you are making. Be kind to yourself, be patient, and never give up on your dream of speaking English fluently.
That is such great advice. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today, Emma. I know our listeners will find this information incredibly valuable. This brings us to the end of today's episode. We covered a lot of ground, from understanding the psychology behind overthinking to practical strategies for speaking with more confidence. We hope you feel empowered to take your English speaking skills to the next level. We would love to hear from you. What is the biggest challenge you face when speaking English? Which of the strategies we discussed will you try first? Share your thoughts in the comments section, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.